the smell of grass and leather. There were days when we'd play too. We'd cross the lines when the sun would shine and make our dreams come true. I had a glove on my hand and a girl in the stands. She stole my heart like a hit and run. It seems the world was so much simpler back then. We was just out there for fun. I pray for someone to hold your hand, and baseball in the summer. Someone to walk with you when this world grows cold. Baseball in the summer. Baseball in the summer.
The man, the myth, the mustache is joining us for our Brockvmac Legendary Rivals podcast, and it's our second crack at it. And I'm just going to set the bar here, Andrew. The only other one we had to record twice was Chris Peters, and so that we all know that Peters kind of brought the fastball the second go around. So
fair enough.
No pressure, but we. Listen, before we get cracking into all things Brock related, we're at the end of yet another baseball season, and I'm sure that it's been a tiring one for you. And, just tell us a little bit about, everyone kind of knows that the season's pretty intense. What does your off season look like? I think that's of interest to some people. Do you get a lot of time off at the end to decompress, or
you know what? We don't really. And I think part of that is the front office baseball schedule is a little different than the on-field, players, major league staff component as far as like the busy times of year. So, really like we've been working on next season for a while now, and we've had, some meetings, and we'll get a little heavier into it, once we get through the weekend series here with the Marlins. But yeah, decompress time is not really now. We got a lot of work to do. Holidays around Christmas time, we usually shut down for 10 days, maybe a couple of weeks. And honestly, like when we get to spring training, it's a little bit less stressful, so to speak, because the majority of your work is done, right? Your roster is set, and then it's more decisions on end of the bullpen, last position player, making sure guys are healthy, that sort of thing.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people wouldn't know that or know the timing of it. And let me ask you this, and we'll get more into it a little bit later, but is it more tiring when you've got a year where the team has struggled, or one where you're winning and, fighting it out for the wild card, and, that's a grind too. But what would you say from your point of view?
I can tell you, I've been with the team since 2001, and I can tell you without a doubt, my most stressful season was 2015. And I think that the seasons where you're in it, we've obviously not this year, unfortunately, but, really 20 to 23. The 1 year in there, we didn't make the playoffs, 21. That was probably our best team. And certainly 15 and 16, like those are the most stressful years, because you get into September and these games mean so much. And honestly, there's times where it becomes hard to watch. 15 was just crazy. I found myself, in our homestands in September at times, like literally like just walking through the streets during our games because I just couldn't watch. It was so stressful. So when you reflect on it, it's like, oh, that was great. But those are the seasons that bring the most stress, I find. Obviously, these types of seasons are more frustrating. But, you kind of know where you stand, a little bit earlier, and nobody likes that. So I would gladly take that stress.
No.
trust me, I remember in 2015 in Kansas City, like Alex and I couldn't sit in the seats or in the suite and watch the game. We sat in like a little cubby closet behind the visiting clubhouse manager's office that had a little TV in it, just because it was so stressful being out, in our suite or in the stands. I mean, that's just kind of how it goes, It was our first time. It was our first go through the playoffs that year. Obviously it gets a little bit easier, but it never gets easy. It's never easy.
Well, it's good to hear that people care to that extent that they have a hard time watching the product they're putting out on the field. And, we'll talk a little bit more about passion and heart and caring and all that kind of stuff. Why don't we go way back in the time machine then, Andrew, and start with your story before you came to Brock, because, your story of actually arriving at training camp is kind of famous, but a lot of people aren't going to understand, a little bit about your influences growing up and how you developed a love for the sport. And why don't we start there?
Yeah, Ottawa kid, right? Played 1 year of hockey, just wasn't for me. Skied a little bit in the winters, but always gravitated towards baseball. And I think part of it was, my dad brought me to some Expos games. We were probably about we were under 2 hours door to door from Olympic Stadium. And, I remember watching, Andre Dawson, who was my favorite player growing up, and Tim Raines and Steve Rogers and those players in like the early mid 80s. I saw Pete Rose get his 4,000th hit as a Montreal Expo back in, I can't remember if it was 85, 86, somewhere in there. And my mom played. She played softball, but I would go out and throw the ball around while she was playing games. And I just got locked into it. I just loved the sport. Grew up playing for pretty Little League Canada, fairly famous program, much like Stony Creek baseball was, High Park baseball. East Nepean was one of the big two in our area that tended to do fairly well. Pinecrest was always our competitor, and trying to get through the next round of districts and playoffs and whatnot. And then my last year, when I started to get 17 or so, I kind of felt all right, I do like this. I think I'm playing pretty well. I love the game, and I want to figure out playing after high school. And I ended up switching to a travel ball program called the Ottawa Nationals. And we played in a league that was, I want to say we had one team from maybe Brockville, but it was mostly a New York State, an upstate New York league that we would play. And we played we played the Sarnia Gold Bat, played against Daryl Houston in that. I want to say he might have been with Leaside at the time. They might have picked him up for it. We played in some tournaments like that, and I just wanted to keep playing, wanted to play college. But I sent out a bunch of letters to U.S. schools, and it was maybe mid-late summer that one of our coaches said, hey, there's going to be a new team at Brock. And this had probably gone through, from McRae to Bykowski, who had come to see our team play. We had we had some younger guys. I probably would have been 19 at the time, but we had a 15-year-old shortstop who ended up going to University of Maine, and we had a bunch of guys who went to JCs and some smaller schools. So, it was hey, Brock's going to have a team, and heard a little bit about it, and I always bug Lounsbury about this. He came and saw me play, and came back, and they tried to I was playing right field, and they wanted to recruit our center fielder, Martin Haru. And I kind of bust on him about that. But it was honestly, I had another opportunity to go to Grand Rapids Community College. And I got accepted very late to the ABC, Academy of Baseball Canada. And I had thought about Grand Rapids. My mom was like, "You're not going to a junior college in Michigan," and I was like, "Okay," but really, I kind of wanted to see what this Brock thing was about.
Amazing. Before we hop into training camp and meeting Lounsbury behind his aviator sunglasses at the time. You mentioned your mom a couple times. Is she a big influence in the person
absolutely.
you've grown up to
be? My parents separated when I was about 3 years old, and look, maintained a good relationship. My dad moved out east to New Brunswick when I was about 13, and I when he was here, I would spend every second weekend or so with him. But I grew up. I'm an only child, so it was my mom and I growing up. And she certainly had a massive influence on my baseball and my school and kind of the path that I've taken, and just learned a lot about hard work and grinding. I mean, it wasn't easy. We were fine. We had pretty good things and good opportunities, and we were able to travel, but we certainly didn't grow up rich. But yeah, she was always I'd like to say my number one fan. And certainly a big influence on on my baseball career. Yeah. Yep.
That's amazing to hear, and I don't think enough people get to elaborate. We're so busy talking about coaches and whatnot, and but I think the quality of person that you are is often dictated by how your parents are influencing. So that brings us to the infamous genesis of. You obviously are choosing Brock because you hear there's whispers of a baseball program, and at that point it could have been anything from George Brown type quality right up to U of T or McMaster, and it wasn't either of those things. Tell me about your learning a little bit of how training camp and what your first conversation, as brief as it was.
Well, I had a sense that it was going to be a little different than a typical Ontario program. I did have a sense that there was going to be a bunch of games against U.S. schools, some junior colleges and some Division One. So I liked that part of the challenge. Obviously, I didn't know what the schedule was going to look like, but I liked that was very interesting to me. So yeah, I just didn't know. And, we didn't have cell phones back then or emails or anything like that. So I didn't really know what was going on. So I had called McRae and left him a message the weekend before training camp. It must have been on the Thursday because we were playing in provincials in Guelph. And I just said, "Hey, Coach McRae, I'm leaving you a message to Andrew Tinnish here. I'm going to come, play for the Ottawa Nationals, want to come play at Brock. If you want to come see me play, I'm going to be at Guelph in provincials this weekend." And left it at that. And I got home that Sunday night, drove back to Ottawa, and there was a message from Coach McRae saying the training camp started the next morning. This is probably, 8, 9 o'clock at least that night at this point. So I call him and I said, "Hey, training camp starts tomorrow." I explained the situation, and and he was like, "Yeah, training camp starts tomorrow." And I said, okay. Hung up the phone, and I looked at my mom, and I'm like, I gotta go. I gotta go. So we called my grandparents who lived in Stony Creek. And at this point, it's probably 9:30. Probably woke them up, and it's just like, "Hey, Grandma, I'm coming down. I gotta stay at your place tonight." And hoping that I had nowhere to stay. We knew we have family friends in St. Catharines, so I was kind of hoping that my grandma could call them and say, "Hey, can Andrew sleep on the couch in the basement for a few nights?" And so I packed up as quickly as I could. One of the first times, I guess, that my mom really kind of got emotional, that was a little like upsetting for, call me as soon as you get there, like I think she thought like, oh my God, he's leaving. He's not coming back. But yeah, I drove through the night, got to my grandparents' place probably around 2 a.m. or so, and just crashed on the couch. And I was so, the way that my conversation with Mike, the way it went, I was like, okay, I'm getting there early. I'm getting there early. So like, I don't think I slept that much, obviously, maybe 4 hours, if that, and then just kind of woke up. I was like, I asked I'm like, Grandma, you got to get me up really early, which she did, and then just off to St. Catharines and sitting in the parking lot in Thorold at was that park McMillan? Is it McMillan? Yeah,
McMillan Park. Yeah,
so
it's and your gut instinct on Mike was so good, right? Like I think that people don't understand that Mike has a famous expression: "If you can be late, you can be early." So being being late's not a winning proposition with him. And I can peel back the onion. I got my own podcast to do for all of this, but the original concept of the Brock program, which involved the first coach, who was Wayne Briggs-Jude, first guy hired. We had a couple of other coaches, one from Welland named Rob Cardis and another one named Bob Smythe. And the intention was always to play American games because of the proximity to the border and the fact there was no football at Brock. Actually, was a big driver in this because that's a big shadow in other campuses. But we wouldn't have had any clue how to schedule the types of competition that Mike brought in. And I think probably a second indoor workout, I looked at the poor guys that we had hired, other than Wayne Briggs-Jude, and I thought to myself, I had better coaching than this in Oshawa. I'm not really signing up for this. So we dismissed them, and thankfully we're given another list of coaches to talk to. Andy DeForest being one, and Mike being another, and we were trying hard to get a hold of both of them. And there, it's a time where there was no cell phone, so it was answering machine central. And Andy DeForest, the guy that ended up coaching with Darryl Kemp for a while, and good reputation in the St. Catharines area, but we were never able to hook up with him. And by the time we did, we managed to interview Mike in the London Arms and the Penn Center. And I think I've said this before, maybe 10 minutes into the thing, he had to go to the washroom, and Ted turned to me and said, "That's the guy." So, it was never going to be a George Brown type situation, but it also, we would have had no idea how to schedule, Don Colpois and Jim Morrow. We're not going to pick a couple of students' words for it, so it's, it was interesting. So tell me what your first impression was of the actual training camp. There were way more people there than, Ted and I thought we were coming with the 32 that left the indoor workouts, and maybe 2 or 3 more. We ended up with about around 50 people initially at camp. What was that like walking into that?
It was, you walk in and there's 60 players, whatever it was. Was it 60? 50 and 60. So you see a lot of guys and like a lot of big guys. And I think no matter how good you think you are, you don't, you should never take anything for granted. And I would say, I wouldn't say that I was intimidated, but I was like, okay, this is the real deal here. And obviously we were split up into positions. So I spent a lot of the time in the early couple days with the outfielders. And, as you've mentioned before in some of the other podcasts, like the outfield group was a pretty strong group, with Bots and Daryl and Juice and myself. So it was like, okay, like this is the real, the real deal. And then you look over in the infield and you're watching guys like Hoover and, and Gypsy, slinging the ball across the diamond. And I was like, this is got a chance to be I had no feel for the pitching at the beginning. I really didn't, because you guys were kind of separate. I still find it wild and very un-McRae-like that we had 9 pitchers on our roster, and we played 36 games in like 6 weeks. So kudos to you guys for, arms not falling off, but that seems like a pretty light as far as pitching staff. But no, you know what, it started to come together pretty quick, and I that first training camp was honestly like one of the best baseball experiences of my life, because it was really my first time like gone, like, all right, I'm 19 years old and I'm kind of on my own here. And, it was such a good way for me to like go off to university, and like, school hadn't even started, and it's already like, well, I've got like 26, 27, 28 teammates or whatever it is. And like, I'm getting tight with like 7, 8, 9 guys already. Like, it was such a good thing. Obviously we all love baseball, and that's great. But it was just a good way to start, an academic, like a university, career. You know what I mean? I think it was the first, like I stayed at my grandparents, our family friend's place for maybe 2 of the nights. And then after that, I was like crashing on a couch at like Simmons' place, or like I was bouncing around a little bit, but it was fine. It was great. It was just, you figured it out, and it was fun.
Yeah, I've got an early memory, and I don't know, it must have been between training camp and or maybe right when we first got the team, because, we had a little bit of a lull, then the season started, and then, it was pedal to the metal for a
couple months.
Like 65, 70 days straight. But I do remember I had those gray and blue Rock baseball shirts, which, early days of graphic design, they're probably not going to win. I think mine
disintegrated, like literally disintegrated. Wow.
So I still have it sitting around, and it doesn't fit anymore, obviously. But the thing is, I remember we went to Front 54 as a group, and we were probably 18, 19 of us, all in those gray shirts. We started traveling in packs a little bit and starting to get noticed on campus. So, it was really, you're right. The bonding happened because we were all pushed into this deep end of training camp and just getting to learn these coaches and stuff. And so we'll start, I don't think you probably felt any competitive pressure to not make the team, because I think the coaches were fairly clear on who was going to and who was on the bubble kinds of things, other than the first base group. But tell me about your early interactions with Darryl Kemp, because he would have been a hitting coach, and pretty interesting guy to deal with early on, and pretty interesting guy actually to just absorb on a baseball field at that time in his life, for sure.
Very smooth, and really probably one of the first interactions I had with a coach where I was really like starting to talk about things in my swing and understand like what, how, like exactly what I was doing. It's crazy. Like I think about this, like I don't think I really knew like really how to hit until I was about 22 years old. When I really started to get, but like Coach Camp was kind of that first coach who like talked me through like hands, barrel, load, things like that. Now I do it every day. Like now I break down swings every day and talk about it all the time, right? Scouting reports, whatever. But that was, he was kind of my first introduction to that. He did do something really weird where he had like a few of us. I remember like it started with Hoover and then kind of shifted to maybe Darryl and Juice might have done it, myself, where like we had this like weird like layback with the barrel. Like, and look, it kind of worked. It was a little different. But the point is, like, he actually taught hitting, right? Like, he taught hitting, he taught the swing, certainly talked about like approach in game, that kind of thing. But it was bigger. It was more about like the actual physical mechanics that, and the way he did it too, right? So slick. But he was really, other than like a little league coach telling me to get my elbow up or down or whatever back in the day, like he was really like the first one who like talked and worked swing, with me. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's hard not to, especially when you're younger. You kind of look at Daryl, who at that time was, I would say, maybe 20 years older than us.
Something like
maybe
that, yeah.
15, 16, 18 years, somewhere in there. And, I think baseball players who appreciate people who carry themselves like a player on the field could see that Daryl was, a great player, but also carried himself in a way that was respectful and deferential to the game, and which brings us to Coach McRae. Coach McRae is, I think, unique for a whole bunch of different reasons, all of which I'm rediscovering as I did his podcast and thought about, you can't help but compare and contrast where the program sits today and where it sat 10 years ago compared to what Mike's vision of it was. And, look, Ted and I had some obvious input into that, but we weren't responsible for getting players other than recruiting some of our friends in, and we weren't responsible for scheduling games, and we weren't responsible for Mike's ambition. So I can tell you that we had a conversation before the team was even launched about applying to the NAIA at that time. So, he had this obvious thing in his head that was springing out. But as a bench coach and as a manager of a team, especially one who came from a pitching background, it wasn't always easy from my perspective. And I think the players felt that too, because he was tough and he was direct. And there were times where he was playing chess and we were just young checkers players. Tell me what it was like with Mike.
So a lot of respect for Mike, obviously. He's a good friend. We keep in touch quite a bit, and I've followed his career pretty closely. Obviously, the relationship becomes a little easier over the years when we're kind of both working in the field. I would say, he was definitely intimidating. He expected a lot out of you as a player, regardless of, your skill set, regardless of how good you were, regardless of whether you were a starter or a bench guy or, starting pitcher or reliever. But I had come from a program that summer. Like, I played for a program with coaches that were tough, like Mike. Guys who had all, like, 3 or 4 of them had played college baseball. A couple of them were bird dog scouts, and they were tough and they were rough, and like, they were expecting the best out of you because they wanted you to, like, hey, you want to go play college baseball, you're going to have to do these things. So I felt like, just based on like talking to other guys and their experiences in summer ball, I felt like I was probably a little bit more prepared for it than most, just because, like, look, we had practices where we came back from a tournament in Plattsburgh, New York, and like we went 2-0 and then we blew a game and then we lost in the semis and we made some errors and we ran. So, the morning, like, hey guys, before class, like, we're doing pole to pole. Last one has to do it again. I'll run with you. Like, that kind of stuff. I had done that kind of thing. I didn't love it necessarily, but I'd been around coaches like that. So Mike,
yeah.
But Mike obviously knew the game. You could tell he had ambition. He had ambition for the program, and obviously, like, he took an opportunity which made sense for him, and kind of literally the rest is history. He's bounced around obviously quite a bit. Now he's at Rutgers as a pitching coach, but he's had a great career as a college baseball coach. I learned a lot from Mike. I think I learned more maybe after the fact, like you kind of like reflect a little bit, you mature a little bit, and you realize like, oh yeah, that made sense. That thing that he did, that thing that he said, how he handled this situation, like I get it. And maybe I didn't get it when I was 19 or 20 years old. So certainly a lot of respect for Mike, and he's very influential on my baseball career as a player and as an employee as well. I played for him the next year at Niagara U when I transferred there, and he was the hitting coach there, and it was a very different person, and I remember he's like, "Hey, Dish, hey," I'm like, "Whoa, who's this guy? Coach McRae? What?" But he knew his role, obviously, whether it was at Brock or Niagara or Winthrop or Maine, Niagara, Canisius, VCU, now at Rutgers. I'm sure, and he knows that. He knows how he has to be as a person, as a coach. Obviously, there's certain things that will never change in him, but he knows that he has to handle things differently as the pitching coach at Rutgers versus the head coach at William and Mary, So, but yeah, great history with him. Yeah.
I think truthfully, a lot of coaches should learn that lesson from Coach McRae, because when you're the head coach, regardless of whether you want to win a popularity contest or be tight with your best players, when you start to play by two sets of rules in a team environment,
yeah,
it doesn't sit well. With Coach McRae, there was one rule, and no one would have been more aware of that than Ted and I. From that perspective, if we pitched bad, we were going to get yanked. If you didn't perform, don't expect to be treated any differently than the 10th pitcher on the roster. And he laid that out very early. And the only times I would ever see any glimpse of, because Mike kept you at arm's length, even if he didn't want to. I think that I respect that. I have a great deal of respect for that approach as a head coach. And then he needed to have these assistants that could come in and, I found Daryl Kemp in I played with Daryl. I played with your coach Jim Morrow on a summer team. Those guys were super positive all the time. And as position coaches or, as specialty coaches, Tim Topping, Daryl Kemp, I found them to be excessively positive, other than the odd sarcastic comment that would fly from them. But, we won't touch on, we may touch a little bit on Briggs Jude and some of this a little bit later. Tell me a little bit about some of the best memories you have from your time as a baseball Badger, because, it was a journey for you, overcoming, losing and then overcoming and winning some championships. Let's put that in your own words as opposed to me.
Yeah. And I think, the one thing I loved about the whole, I played 5 years at Brock, and, we were always playing in games that mattered, and that was the thing. It was always really competitive. I loved our experiences playing the U.S. schools. I know we got waxed a little bit in '95, and we were just kind of getting into it and getting ready. We swept Canisius in '96 at Mackenzie, and I think it just completely shocked them. So I think as the years went on, we really did compete well. And I know we weren't getting their Friday night guy, their Saturday night guy. We were probably getting, midweek starter, midweek relievers, that kind of thing. But we competed really well, and we won games against. I think the only team we didn't beat was Lemoyne, but we beat Canisius, 3 or 4 times. We beat Niagara 3 or 4 times. Beat Bonnie once, which was a huge win in fall of '99, I want to say it was. And obviously like the junior colleges, we could handle them pretty well. So I think like that was good just from like a team perspective of like, all right, like we can do this, like we're pretty good. We're pretty balanced, and honestly, like my best memories, as painful as some of them were always those national championships, right? So going to Montreal, the weather being absolutely horrible, just grinding through our way to the finals, and unfortunately losing to Laval in extra innings, 4-3. Like, that as painful as that is, like I took a lot from that. Like and I think a lot of the team did, and and obviously I do feel for teammates, guys like you and Ted, and guys, who were there for 3 years and never got to experience a national championship, a SEBA national championship. But like when we won in '98, that was like, it was like literally 4 years of like literal blood, sweat, and tears and grind just to win that was such a huge moment for us. Especially, not to take away from guys who only start, but like the guys who'd been there at that point for 3 or 4 years, Fletch and Botts and, Dixon and like the guys who came at the Cheesemans, Giffens, Del Rios, like it was just such a surreal moment when we won that. 'Cause there's times where you're like, we're never going to win. We lost in the championship in '95. We lost the championship game in '96 to Trevor Wambach, right? Like, all right, like Trevor Wambach, like how are we going to beat this guy, right? We lost to Mac in '97 in the conference championship, 2 out of 3. And I remember that car ride home. It was like me, I think it was Giff, Fletcher, I think Mark Purdy was with us, maybe Fab, and we're driving home, and from Hamilton, from Bernie Arbor back home, and I'm like, I'm sitting there, I'm like, that's it, man. Like, we're not losing again. Like, that's it. We're done losing. We're winning this thing next year. And we had a group of about like 8 of us or so who, and obviously some others, but like a core who like we just freaking grinded. We were on each other, weight room, swings, like extra practice, like this is it. We're done. We're done losing. We're not losing. And we get to, obviously, long story short, fast forward to championship game, UNB in '98, and we beat Mac in the conference final, and that was huge. I actually gave up. In game 1 at Burning Arbor, I gave up a walk-off home run. I was coming out of the pen to close. I gave up a walk-off home run to their number 9 hitter, like Graham, like Hollingsworth or Holloway or something like that. And I ran into the dugout, and I'm glad I didn't break my hand, but I punched the back of the dugout about as hard as I could and swore really loud. My grandmother was in the stands. I hope she didn't hear me. And I'm like, I can't believe it. Like, I just blew this game 1 in a best 2 out of 3. And then Greg Arbor, lefty, comes out next game and just shuts them down. Like, I think he gives up 1 run and goes like 6 or 7. We win like 9 or 10-1. So then we got game 3 back home, and we're like, we got this. And we won anyway. So fast forward, we get to the finals. We go 3-0 in the round robin, which was big because kind of save a pitchers. Like, we were in a good spot. UNB had a really good pitcher who they had to use to get to the finals. Guy like lefty, could probably 85, 87, could spin it. So they couldn't use him. We're a home team, and we give up 3 in the first inning. And I could see a couple guys like, oh my God, here we go again. And Bots gets up to lead off the inning, double. We're like, all right, here we go. Giff gets up, draws a walk. Jeremy Walker's up next. I think he had a ground ball. He moved them over. So I come up with second and third, and I'm just like locked in. Home run, center field, tie game. Jared Haas is behind me. 2 pitches later, home run, hits a missile, and then we just kind of take off. So, we had that kind of team. Like we had probably like between those 98 and 99 teams, like we had, we probably hit like the one year we probably hit like 40, 50 home runs as a team. Like Fletcher hit 10. Like I think I had like 7 or 8, a couple guys with 6, bunch of guys with like everyone through the lineup hit like 3 or 4. It was just it was a pretty powerful lineup. And those experiences, like winning in 98 was just like the peak, and it was all the build up. Like it was all like the losing in 95, losing in 96, just like the lessons you learn along the way. And then you get to the point where as a group, you're just like, okay, like we've got to do something different. Let's do it. And like just the buy-in that we had was amazing from the whole team. It was great.
Amazing. Andrew, what were you taking in school during all of this? And was it hard to balance that uber commitment to baseball with?
I bounced around.
Classes?
The pit stop at Niagara kind of like put a little dent into things. So I bounced around between like kinesiology and rec and leisure and sports man. I ended up with sports management is what I ended up graduating with. So I thankfully, like I had some classes and electives that fit with the SPEMA degree. And I want to say it was probably like probably like 4th year where like I really like started diving into that. Played 5th year. I went back for a 6th year to finish up the degree and coached, helped coach that year. First year of wood bat back in 2000. Yeah.
Seems like a lifetime ago, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's amazing. So you have this very decorated Brock career. You win some national championships. You get a chance to go try Niagara on for size, which is an experience in itself. Tell me a bit about what happens after you're done school. So I think a lot of us will know this story, but you'll play a little pro ball in Quebec.
Yeah, I played indie ball in the summer of '99, and actually was able to come back and play at Brock that fall. So the when we played Laval in nationals in '98, the head coach for Laval, I think his name was JF Cote, Jean-François Cote. He approached me after their game, and we had played against them in the past, and he basically said, "Hey, listen, like there's a new indie ball team, a new pro team in Quebec City starting up next year, called the Quebec Capitals. It's going to be in the Northern League. He was the general manager of the team, and he's like, look, I'd like you to come to an open tryout." So I was like, whoa, all right. I got like, now I'm like super locked in, right? I'm like, all right, I'm going to do this tryout. Like I got to work. I got to get going. I got to get stronger. And, was doing literally 2-a-days, like 5-6 days a week through, the end, like post nationals in '98 into the spring of '99. Grabbing like guys to hit, grabbing Del Rio like 5 days a week to throw. Upstairs, there's a little lane like near where the wrestlers would have their wrestling room. There's a little lane back there behind the stands, Gym 1, sorry, where we would long toss, and we were there a ton. We were throwing all the time, and it's really weird. Like at one point, I kind of thought I kind of shifted gears from going like, I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this as a hitter. But I'm left-handed, and like I was probably touching like 88, when I was really on. So I'm like, I think I'm gonna like try this as a pitcher, like because I had closed like I would, give up that walk-off home run to Graham Holloway, but I was at times a successful closer, and I was literally like I was 90% fastballs. Like I would just like reach back, and it was kind of like how I threw from the outfield, like just reach back and just see what I could do. So I went to the tryout as both, and actually I will say this: I was really grinding through with another guy from Ottawa, former national team guy named Rob Latulip. Like when we got home before the tryout, we grinded through it, and then like we almost burnt out, and he was like, man, like I don't think I'm gonna go to the tryout. Like I don't want to play. I've done the college thing. I played for Ascentcan or whatever, and I kind of got like the same way. I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna go. And so Lounsbury called me 2 days before the tryout, and he's like, hey, like good luck. Like go get him. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna go. And he's like, what? You've been working your ass off all winter. Like you've been working so hard. Like you're going. And I'm like, you're right. I'm going. So Bots and I drove down. We stayed in a motel. It's probably like $29.99 a night or something like that. We go to check. Like we had no room. Like we go to this open trial. Like we go to check in. Like, hey, can we get a room? And like the guy's like, look at these two guys. Like, what's going on here, man? I don't know what the deal is here, but it was a little uncomfortable. But we went and like I did both. I threw a pen, and I hit a bit, and then I think they had a radar gun on me, and they called and they invited me back for training camp, which was about 10 days later. So I went home and I came back and. I made the team. I think part of it was, there was guys that got hurt, or there was a guy that got hurt, and my rookie status actually helped me because a lot of these guys had played pro ball, and you could only have a certain amount of like veteran or like certain status, and you needed to have like, I think you needed to have 3 or 4 rookies, designated rookies with no pro experience on your team in the Northern League back in the day. So that kind of helped me. And my first half stunk. I was scared on the mound all the time. And my second half, I just kind of like, I had a coach who was like, hey, like, why don't you try and drop down, like lower your slot. And I was like, yeah, like I used to do that at Brock sometimes. Like that was kind of my out. Like, why haven't you done it? And it just kind of turned my season around. I started throwing like literally sidearm fastballs and like kind of like a sweeper from that low slot, and my first half ERA that was like 10 became like I got into the 6s with like a 3.5 ERA in the second half. But I mean, it was a great experience. You're on the road, buses, like play a 3-game series at home. All right, game's over at 10, midnight bus, drive through the night, sleep for 3 hours when you get to the hotel, get up, go to the park, play a game the next day. Like it was a good experience. It was a grind, but it was a tremendous experience. I wouldn't trade that for the world. It was great.
You're a pretty thoughtful guy for a pitcher. Truthfully, I like your mindset. Strikes me as that of an everyday player, and I only say that because if there was a poster child for pitching mentality in the world, it would be me. I hate seeing the field. I hate being on it. I hate bats, and I hate people who hold bats. So that's a lovely way to be. But what prompted your decision to want to continue with baseball as a career? And that can be daunting sometimes because typically, I like to make fun of Darryl Kemp, but Darryl Kemp started 4 or 5 people off in London Life, for example, right, with Rick. And Rob Green's one of them, but Billy Newton from the McMaster team is another one. What prompted you to want to continue?
I just love the
baseball as a
game
career?
so much and being around it, and I could. I mean, not that I couldn't see myself doing other things. I just wanted to do this. Like I just everything about the game I love. You know, obviously, like I've grown into different roles that maybe I didn't know were going to be things that were interesting to me at the time. You know, a couple things. So in the summer of '97, when I was done at Niagara, I went to visit my dad out in New Brunswick during the 18 and under World Championships. Moncton hosted it at this park called Kiwanis Park in Moncton, and it was my first experience around scouts. And Walt Burrows, who was with the Scouting Bureau at the time, he's with the Minnesota Twins now. I saw him last week, actually, here at Rogers Center for the Canadian Future Showcase. He was there scouting, and they writing reports on the Canadians and Cubans, and Rick Ankiel was like the big guy for Team USA that year, and I just kind of sat with him and like asked him questions, and he was great. Like he talked to me and he gave me some advice, and who knew that like 5 years later I'd be with the Blue Jays as an assistant in baseball ops. Blue Jays would send me to the Major League Scouting Bureau Scout School, and Walt Burrows was my instructor. And and he remembered, and he really like him and Kevin Briand, who's one of our pro scouts. These guys really shaped my scouting career, and my passion for scouting. So, that first interaction with Walt really got me interested in it, and some of the coaches on that, including Kevin Briand, on that Ottawa Nationals team before I came to Brock, were bird dog scouts, and like they would talk about scouting and stuff like that, and just things that like I was interested in on like how they were seeing the game. My summer of 2000 I got a job with Baseball Ontario running the Honda Hit Run Throw program kind of around southwestern Ontario. And Kevin Briand is now then the manager of amateur baseball for the Toronto Blue Jays. And he's running instructional clinics and tryout camps across Ontario. And, my Honda Hit Run Throw would keep me busy like maybe 4 days a week, maybe sometimes 2, maybe sometimes 5, whatever. But I was able to kind of coordinate it around like the stuff that he was doing. And he was like, hey, you want to help out? Like I pay you a little bit. And I had a Honda Odyssey all decaled up, and Brienne and I would hit the road, and like we'd go to a trial camp. I'd throw to like 70 kids, and like he would evaluate, and we'd talk afterwards, and he would explain to me like, hey, like this guy with 2 or 3 or 4, like 2-day scale. And, we traveled all around Ontario that summer, and it was just like such an unbelievable learning experience. We're just grinding, we're staying like in these roach motels and like going to Subway or something, but like you're learning so much, you're around the game, you're just kind of grinding through it. And like I'm like, I could do this every day. I really could. I want to try. And Kevin helped me a lot. He ended up the next summer, he had to hire an internship for that same position. He hired me for the summer of 2001, where now I'm doing that job, but I'm based out of Rogers Center, getting exposed to, people like Gord Ash and our assistant GM, Tim McCleary at the time. Dave Stewart was around, and, I'd help out during the draft and just try and listen and learn. And it was wild. Like it was a great experience, that's kind of helped shape my career and, sort of lead me to this point, to the positions I've been in the last handful of years, that I really, certainly appreciate those early days. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, we're going to touch on your family here shortly, but before we do, I think on our last podcast, our attempt to record a podcast, You told me a little fascinating story about what you feel like. We all have, stuff that we step into professionally, like we get into a rut, or we make a mistake, and it's good to have self-awareness to understand that. In my case, I think everybody knows this. I will charge up any hill with a bayonet, thinking, the Titanic, I can turn it around even though it's going down. Optimism is a great thing, but you have to have a realist in your life to make sure that you don't hit your head so much. Tell me a little bit about, both the benefit and the hazard of your discovery of Marcus Stroman.
Oof. Wow. That was my third draft as scouting director. And, he's truly one of a kind. Like, he really is. And I remember seeing him the summer before. He was playing with Team USA, and I saw them at Fenway playing. I can't remember, it was the Korean national team, collegiate team or something. He was at Duke, but he was pitching for Team USA. And I remember after the game, I was catching up with Alex, and I said, he was like, "Hey, how's Team USA looking?" Like, he was always like so locked into the amateur stuff because he knew, like, hey, these the next crop of guys who could be first round picks, whatever, the next year. What's going on in Cape Cod League? What's going on with Team USA? That kind of thing. And we go through a couple of guys, and I said, I just saw Stroman pitch, and he's like, how was it? I'm like, he could close for us right now, like tonight. Like, if we were playing at Fenway tonight, he could pitch the ninth inning. It was that electric. It was like 94, 97, might have touched an 8, wipe out, like just ridiculous ability to spin and feel for it. 2 breaking balls. And he's not a big guy, he's a strong guy. And it actually, like, it really helped me learn a lot about, like, there's no doubt, like, if you're going to start in the big leagues, like, the template is not Stroman, right? It's more Roy Halladay. It's more AJ Burnett. It's more like, other guys we took in those, like, it's more Noah Syndergaard and Aaron Sanchez and Joe Musgrove and guys like that we drafted. But, this guy was like an elite competitor and an elite athlete. And the way he moved, and it's made me come to appreciate really, like, the ability to move as a pit, like how you move on the mound, how you move through your delivery can tell you a lot. Can tell a scout a lot about, like, what type of potential success, command, ability to adjust, durability a player might have long term. And the only thing he wasn't was 6'2", right? Like, everything else he did at an absolutely elite level. The one thing we were a little bit concerned about was his fastball was a little flat, and he threw a 4-seamer. He didn't throw a 2-seamer back then. He learned his 2-seamer in AA. But it was just such, like, an electric arm, an electric athlete that, we kind of went against the grain a little bit. And to be honest, the majority of our room thought that he was going to be a closer. That, like, hey, this guy's going to pitch important innings, but they're going to be at the end of the game, not at the start. And of course, in classic Marcus Stroman fashion, he just proved us wrong and blew through the minors, picked up a sinker in AA that all of a sudden became, like, his best pitch. And the rest is history. Like, there, massive chip on his shoulder, massive. And I think that, not necessarily warranted. Like, you're short. I get it. He's short, but, drafted out of high school, Duke, Team USA, like, a little bit less of it, but that sort of mentality helped him, I think, become, great and, turn into the pitcher that he's become. I mean, he's been, obviously he's had his ups and downs recently, but, like, you look back on his career and, like, he's been an impact starter in the big leagues. it's certainly one that, as a, like, one where you're kind of putting your name on the line as a scouting director, I feel pretty proud of that one, obviously. Yeah.
And as you should. Listen, pitching is a lot like fronting a band or being a soloist in a symphony. It's a totally different professional mentality. And from someone like me, I have always, I've done a little bit of help with kids that wanted to go a little bit further. And I always just said to them, like, if you want to pitch, you got to be on one of two extremes. You got to be, break it down to a battle of wills and out emotion the person that's in that batter's box. Or you have to be so calculating that you can say to yourself, I'm going to throw this pitch 4 inches off the outside corner of the plate at 87.5 velocity, so it's going to move an extra 2 inches and miss the bottom of that bat by half an inch. Now, like, that takes kind of Rain Man like type quality,
Greg Maddux type stuff. Yeah.
So Stroman was more of a, that archetype is out there. Clemens and Ryan and all these guys that just put it into a who's the toughest guy in the bar kind of attitude. There's nothing wrong with that. Andrew, but so tell me the other side of that coin. So you get this big win with, Stroman, who's a little bit of a breaks the mold a bit. But one of the things that happens in life is we fall in love with our wins sometimes. Tell me a little bit about what you learned from that, not maybe immediately, but later on in your career.
Well, what do you mean specifically, Mike?
Well, I remember in our first podcast, you're like, well, then I started to think,
be a
Marcus Stroman.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that.
I think that he's obviously very unique and kind of a unicorn. But as I slid, into doing like more just amateur and international stuff, I kind of would get locked in, especially the young guys, where you see them move and you're like, wow, like, it's a good move. The kid might be like 5'9", 160 pounds, but he's only 15 years old. And there was a bunch of times I'm like, just like Stroman. Oh, look at that pause in his delivery, just like Stroman. We got a kid now who, great kid named Samuel Acuna. I remember the day, like, when we saw him, like, a bunch of in Venezuela, we're like, that's Marcus Stroman. And he's literally like 5'7" when he was 14 years old. And he's about 18 now, recovering from Tommy John, and he's still 5'7". He's strong. Like, he works, but like, the reality is, Stroman was absolutely an outlier, and I got sucked into that, like, smaller but athlete actions, mover and away from like size, right? And I mean, look, when you really put it together, like, the good ones are the 6'2", lean, 185-pound elite mover type guy. But I think I learned pretty quickly that, like, you really, unless you're a freak athlete, you got freak twitch, like Tim Lincecum, Marcus Stroman, like that type. It's really hard, and you're probably feeling it in your body right now from throwing like one inning the other day, right? But it's really hard, like, to throw 80, 90, 100 pitches at full intensity every 6th day, 5th day, maybe 7th day, and do that over and over and over, 25 times, 30 times. Like, if you're a full wire-to-wire starter now, 32 times, maybe 33. Like that, like, I have so much respect for, obviously, pitchers in general, but like the major league starting pitcher, the guys who do it year after year, the guys who are able, like, look, you can say what you want about Jose Barrios. The one thing you can say is that he's going to be out there. He's going to take the ball, and he may give up some runs, but he's going to give you innings, outside of opening day from last year, of course, when he went like a third of an inning and got knocked around. But, you look up and you're like, oh, this guy throws like 180 innings every year. And that is, think of how comforting that is for a manager, and I remember in my early days with the Jays, like, you're like, oh my God, like our pen is a mess. Like we had a starter go 2 1/3, a starter go 3. Like who's starting? Holiday start. Oh, thank God, Holiday starting tomorrow. And you just knew, especially after that like he was going to give you 8. Because he's just like, I gotta pick this team up.
I think it benefits when you play, because then you understand the value of someone that calms everybody down, and they know that the game's going to be competitive, right? And it's a big responsibility. It's not easy. Again, it's different. Like in the concept of a batting order, you can blend a little bit. Like if someone else is hot, it's not going to matter how great you are. If the guy in front of you is tearing the cover off the ball, then that game, it's their time to shine. But I said to Chris Peters on his podcast that pitching is the only position on the field where your replacement actually starts warming up during the game. And you have to literally look over your shoulder.
Got to be tough mentally, right? Got to be tough.
So you just got to be, I think it's a combination of either mental or emotional toughness, or for me, it was cathartic, right? So it was like, I want to expel this demon or this anger or this absolute need to just, be combative, and then when you're off the field, the other 4 days, you're a good cheerleader or you chart or whatever. But I freely acknowledge that it was just my day to be an asshole.
Yeah.
And I was good with that. So, Andrew, let's talk about, the only team that matters, your family. Tell me a little bit about, how that came into your life, because, you strike me as a guy that would have worked really hard and was traveling a lot, so it couldn't have been easy. Tell me a little bit about that part of your life.
My wife and I met at Brock, my wife Trina. She's a teacher. She's been a teacher for 25 years now in the Niagara Catholic Board. We have 2 kids. My son's in grade 12, Ty. My daughter Mia's in grade 10. It was always great. It was always great. It's a lot less stressful now because, they can manage on their own, and like Ty has his license and can drive around, and like it's amazing how things open up when that comes into the picture. But I mean, my wife Trina, like she runs our house, and like none of us would survive without her. None of us, so she really has 2 full-time jobs. And I would argue that she had 3 in my early scouting director days. Back in 2010, she was on mat leave with Mia, and Mia was, 1 and Ty was 3. And I just finished my first year as scouting director, and it was a grind. Like I was gone, like late January through the draft in June. I was gone 25 days a month. I'd go out for 5, come home for 2. I'd go out for 12, or come home for 2, go out for 8, that kind of thing. And, looking back, I was learning on the job. I did a poor job of scheduling, but I felt like I always had to be at the best game. And so it was like one day I'm in California, and then the next day I'm in Arizona, and then I fly to Texas, and then I fly to Georgia. I'm kind of flying all over the place. And it took me a while to learn how to manage that and schedule and just be smarter about my travel. Meanwhile, my wife is home with 2 infants, right? And in February of 2011, she came off of mat leave and went back to work full time. So just imagine, like, most of your week, most weeks that you got to get a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old out of the house by 7 a.m., take them to daycare, drop them off, go to work a half hour away, 25 minutes away, whatever it is, work the full day, come back, pick the kids up at daycare, feed them, bathe them, like maybe get a half an hour to yourself. So I would go on the road, and like it was usually like around day, like I can't believe she lasted, like she was as strong as she was, like it was just unbelievable. But around day 8, she would call, and like that would be kind of her breakdown day, and she'd be in tears, and we made a really wise family decision at the time that she would drop to part-time the following year. Just give her a little breathing room on either end, which was so huge. But again, still like young kids, getting them around while I'm gone. So those years where I had like scripted travel, where it's like I have to be away during these times, were no doubt challenging, and I think it only made us stronger in our relationship, you know and it's just one of those things where like I often look back, and we don't talk about it that often those days, but we will from time to time, and I really appreciate all the because she sacrificed so much, like she really did, like she sacrificed her own well-being in a sense so that I could live out my dream in this job. And there was years where I'd be on the road between 2010 and let's say 14, those 5 years, like I'm sure I was gone at least 150 days a year, if not more. In some days it was probably 180, or some years probably 180. So, thankfully now I do travel. Like I'm gone a decent amount, quite a bit, but it's a lot. Like I can control it quite a bit better, and I don't miss as much, and I can still go out and throw BP. Like last night we had an off day. I threw BP to my son's team indoors. Like they're in the middle of fall ball, and like I love doing that stuff, and then I can drive him home, or I can pick him up or pick her. No, like so she doesn't have to do it, and it's been rewarding all these years, and certainly having her along for the ride. And I think the only thing really left for me is to win a World Series and have her there with me when we win. Like that would be like, I think if that happened, I could just walk out and be like, all right, if that's all I got, that's all I need. You know what I mean? That's it.
Either that, or you're going to have to take her to the world's best spa.
Yeah,
for
fair enough.
6 months.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Andrew, let's pivot a little bit. I mean, we can talk a little bit about this season, but we can touch on that in a little bit. Given that I am sporting a swollen elbow and a swollen knee, I'd like to touch a little bit about our former program at Brock. And, I think it's safe to say that a lot of things came under the microscope in the process of pulling together podcasts and, seeing guys, I hadn't seen in 30 years, one hop on a plane from Florida, and, these kinds of things. So I think there's room to do some healing in this program and some rediscovery, because you look at the spirit of the Mac guys who have a little less fracture. What do you think it's going to take to kind of, I think it's just getting into rhythm of trying to get together a little bit more and maybe having more diverse ways about it. But, there has been some stuff that I wasn't, super in the loop on, but it seems unfortunate that various elements have kind of taken up a little bit of camp A, camp B type of stuff. What do you think is going to be needed to kind of, heal some of that?
Yeah, I think, look, a lot of my best friends are, and I wish I saw them more, are former teammates, right? Like I keep in touch with the Bottses and the Dixons of the world, and the Colin Tyler, Grucci's, Del Rio's, Giffens, like those types of guys. Like I'm still pretty, good friends with those guys. Mark and I are really good friends. Like, I wish I could be around more. I try to be around the program and get down and help out if I can, maybe the odd time in the winter or training camp or something like that. And, I think we probably just as a group, need to, like you said, like probably get together more. Look, the reality is, Mike, like you and Ted, guys like are pioneers of this program, and really none of us would be like, I don't know what my life would have been like if you didn't start the Brock program. Like I think, like sometimes you take a step back and you think about it and you're like, geez, like, I met my wife at Brock. I wouldn't have gone to Brock if there wasn't a baseball team. I wouldn't have. There's 0% chance, So I'm very thankful for that. I think one thing that I think about is that, the after 95, we had a good team, we had a good season, but after 95, a lot of people left, right? And look, some left because they graduated naturally, right? And some didn't graduate and like kept going in school and just didn't want to play anymore. And, obviously Coach McRae moved on to a great opportunity, and like no one would ever hold that against him, of course. But, it left a group of us really having to scramble to like keep the team going, right? Like it left, Fletch and Botts and Dixon and myself, and Hoover hung along for a bit, and like Hoover got an opportunity to go to Niagara U the next fall and like finished out his career and had a good college career. I played with him for 1 year in '97, but he was a good Division I player at Niagara U. Garton obviously went to Winthrop, but it was tough. Like we were scrambling, and we were worried, because we go to practice that winter in '96, and there was like 6 of us. Like Eves was around. We knew Eves was going to play, but we knew he was going to play. But there were times where we were like we went to practice 3 days a week at like 6:30 in the morning, and there was no coach, right? It was like we get out some hockey nets and hit into it. Grucci, Colin, Dixon, Fletch, Botts, myself. Hoover may come out. Hoover would come out. But it was like, I think, and that helped us develop a stronger bond. Like that group of guys who, were around for 96 and 97. I wish all those guys were around for 98 when we won. And unfortunately they, not all of them were. But like, I think there's times where it's just like, man, like where'd everybody go? So I do think there is an element of that, because like, I feel like in a sense, and I know I'm not always around, like, I feel like some of us have always been around and we haven't really left the program. Like I talked to Coach Del Rio and Coach LePage. I talk to Mark all the time. Like we talk about the team. Like I went and watched Waterloo and Guelph on the weekend. Like I try to, try and help them out with what they're looking at. So I think that like, like we gotta definitely, you're right. Like we gotta try and get together. And like, I don't know if people want to see 50-year-olds playing baseball, but we got to get together for sure. There's no doubt. But I think what's important is that, like, I think a lot of us, I appreciate that you're coming back and you're doing all this work. It's great. These podcasts have been unbelievable. And it's rekindled a lot of things. And We've got to like, oh man, like see some people, talk to some people, watch some podcasts. Like it's been really cool. But there's also the other end of it where like some of us never really left. You know what I mean? And it's not a resentment thing,
No.
but it's just like there was a time where we felt like we were left out there hanging and worried about like our future with the team, And thankfully, Jeff and LePage and Briggs Jude and Kent, like those guys picked it up, and we kept going. But it was scary I'm not gonna lie to you, it was scary for a bit,
Yeah, it's a little bit of what I like to call melted snowball syndrome. So, like it's a core group of people who carried it through multiple years. And at a certain point when those same people are always the ones carrying the weight, it gets, the thing is it becomes tiring for those people. And at a certain point, you're right. It's a lot of where did those people go? I will say this, there's fundamental things that need to get healed that shouldn't fall on the shoulders of the current coach. They shouldn't fall on the shoulders of the previous coaches. There's a little bit of difficulty there, and be irresponsible and not adult if you just left the elephant in the room and said it's all been rosy for 30 years. We're the Pittsburgh Steelers with 3 coaches. That's how I chose to look at this program for years. It's like all 3 the current coach, the previous coach, and the original coach were all on the same original coaching staff, right, hired by Ted and I. So it's hard not to think of it as Pittsburgh Steelers, where it's family owned, everything's merry, there's consistency. It's the program's a lot different now than it was, and there's different realities. But I will know this. Sometimes when you open up the circus tent, different circuses come to town, clearly, like a baseball game between 50-year-olds. The reality is the quality of the ball was horrible, and the McMaster team clearly had a lot more guys playing. But to see Marcus Soyan go out and play probably better than he ever did, or see Chris Peters, whack a couple of hits. I don't think Chris Peters, in true form, would have hopped on a plane to come from Jupiter, Florida, to come to a golf tournament, okay? Because we get those options all the time. So I think, the idea of doing some alternate programming that allows to the one thing that was priceless to me, because I've blown my knee and my elbow out because I didn't even get a chance to stretch, was sitting in the dugout and listening to Daryl Kemp be so positive with 50-year-old guys saying, to Todd, it was great to see you strike out a guy. And that just reminded me of one very basic fact, which is, we all have our friends. I've kept in touch with the Houston boys and Chris, they've come to my 40th, and I've gone, to hockey games with them and stuff. And there was no need for us to splinter off from the main group of Brock Badgers. It wasn't just about our Oshawa experiences, because they were just as short in duration as our Brock experiences for some of us. I think anything that you can do to understand that we were all in the same foxhole together, and to just take a step back and think, that joke that I heard once in a doubleheader between games against Genesee Community College, or that time that, that guy gave me that piece of advice, and after going 0 for 4, I went, 2 for 3 the next game. And when I was sitting beside him on the bench, he happened to tell me that, his mom was sick. Those kinds of things which happen in baseball as opposed to any other sport, right? When you're on hockey and you're between shifts, you're not going to talk to your line mate about anything in depth. But Andrew, you've had conversations with people when we're sitting in a dugout in between ends of a doubleheader that have nothing to do with, hey, that pitcher looks good out there. It's hey, do you remember, how
that's when we get in trouble. That's why we had to run in the morning, because McRae would hear us.
Yeah, but that's the charm of baseball. So, I'd like to think that, as much as it would behoove us all to take up a collection and hire some psychiatrists to straighten out, why this person doesn't like that person, at the end of the day, the power of healing is going to come in some form of a baseball type atmosphere, whether that's going to a Jays game all together, or whether it's playing a slow pitch game together, or whether it's trotting out and getting our asses kicked by McMaster again. The reality is we've discovered some things, and I think the number one thing is it's rekindled as much interest in Matt King and what he's been up to, as opposed to everyone probably pretty much knows what you've been up to, which has been good. But, for me, I kind of know your story a little bit because we float in some of the same circles. But, to me, it was really interesting to see Ryan Thompson. And I'll use Ryan Thompson as the best example from this last weekend. I totally forgot that Ryan Thompson even played on the team when I was putting together this. He was the one guy I left off the roster. And then when I did his podcast, I totally forgot that Ryan Thompson had quit the team. So clearly, this is like the name Ryan Thompson doesn't resonate for me. But to see Ryan come out and be enthusiastic and play well, he made a couple of pretty good plays, and just see his enthusiasm level unhinged like that reminded me that I remember having a discussion with Thompson right at the start of training camp. He was one of the few guys that would have known who I was at that point, other than some grouchy guy there in an Oshawa Legionnaires scenario there. And, it's those kinds of guys that you need to make an effective, non-small alumni. People that have been there for a year or two or three, but that may have been bench players, that may not be the people that come immediately to mind. When they start contributing and participating, then that takes the load off of tired shoulders. And I would say that you guys do it willingly, you do it enthusiastically, but at a certain point, if there's 20 other people or 30 other people or 60 other people in the room that are willing to kind of help this thing along, the program will benefit from it tenfold. And if I have one thing left to do in my Brock baseball life, it's to make sure that the current coach doesn't feel like it's his program, but that he's the head of a program that's owned by an entire 30-year history of players that have come and gone through there. And that's what we can do. That's a gift worth digging in for. It's a gift worth blowing my elbow up for, because, seeing someone like you in a way where we're not crossing paths in the Dome and just sitting down in Welland, is worth it for me. And I think it's worth it for everybody. So, we're going to move forward with some form of, use this as a building block. But, I think it starts in our backyard, because I saw the Mac guys. They're pretty tight. Of course, they won a championship together. We gave them a little more leeway, but they've also gone into their school Hall of Fame together, right? McMaster put the 1997 team in, and I think the only way we're ever going to get Brock to come around to putting, by rights, the 98 and 99 teams in, is to, have them understand that the sport, the athletes who participated in the sport, the graduates, the people that were there for a year, whatever it is, that was their touch point at Brock. And that bead beats pretty hard here. So if they start to get back involved with the school or with the team and start to contribute in a positive way, even with a podcast, that might open up the athletic department to finally start to recognize that the sport is just as important as rowing and wrestling and men's basketball and women's hockey. At the end of the day, that's my chip. That's my Marcus Stroman chip. I still feel that the university could be more respectful to the history of baseball at the school, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's fair. And look, you obviously, I have a lot of respect for your passion, and again, like, there's so many of us owe a lot to, you guys, you and Ted, and just putting this program together. Well, I guess probably it was 94 when you guys first started this, right? And
yep.
I mean, look what it's turned into, right? 30 years, some championships, a lot of good history, a lot of good graduates, some professional players, right? Like Alex Nolan pitched in our system for a few years, right? Who we signed. I drafted Sean DeValeriot, my third year as scouting director, in the 39th round, I think. Played a couple years in the minor leagues with us. Jamal Joseph was with, I want to say, the Marlins, signed him as an NDFA, and others, guys who've gone on to have, do tremendous things in baseball, outside of baseball. And I think, look, the one thing I will say, the one person who's put more time into Brock baseball over the last 30 years, if you count the hours, I don't think anyone has more hours than Mark LePage. He's been there, other than a short stint at Guelph, where he actually brought his team to the championship game, beat us in the semis in 2000, I want to say. Anyways, frustrating game. But outside of that, he's put in more hours than anyone into this program, and he's the one who's had to deal with the ups and downs at the school for years, and that's a thankless. It's not like he's getting paid to do it either. You know what I mean?
No. I absolutely understand that. Everything is done. It's hard because I think that job and the history of it, the coaching job specifically, and the history of it is you get it from both sides, right? You get it from, I wouldn't say two, but people whose motives are different, are all about, wins and losses. That's not how you measure the quality of program. To me, I always use the Rob Green test. I think, Rob and I have a relationship outside of, being guys who pitched on the first Brock team, but he is running, one of the best corporate insurance companies in Canada, and it's growing by leaps and bounds. That's the kind of graduate Brock needs to invest in, the type of character, frankly, on the field that defines a Badger. But I think the hard part is that the coach position gets it from both sides. You get the athletic directors that have to deal with budget cuts and how the sport is classified and all that other crap that comes with it, and how come you want to play these U.S. games and all that stuff. And I get it. But I think the hard part is when you've been doing it so long with the same. I just think of Mark as Meet the Fockers, the circle of trust. And you have someone like me that comes along and says, we want to build a bigger circle. That's going to be what defines the next 10 years of his coaching. Is maybe we can help him free up some more resources. A lot of the guys involved are coaching baseball, teachers, because Brock's got the School of Ed, and we can kind of help guys get new gigs and stuff. Andrew, I know that
top of the first
pitch
top
is
of the first.
at you.
We get Rios is through. What do we got? We got a runner on first, 2 outs here. So still want to win, right? Still want to finish strong. Yeah. The only benefit of losing is getting higher draft lottery odds at. Now we're down 1-0 at the first pick of the draft, or a higher pick in the draft. So not where you want to be, unfortunately, but
Well, very much like our first conversation, I think and you're not going to hear a lot of this because, disgruntled fans just tend to measure the whole, but the back half of the season, as a guy that I think is not a untrained eye when it comes to this stuff, the lineup's gotten a lot harder to pitch to because there's complementary types of hitters in it as opposed to a photocopy of the same holes in the swing. As a guy that I think also understands the modern formula for winning, just go get a couple more guys in the back end that throw
that'll help.
digits. And if you can do that, and those aren't easy to find, but these good young teams that you see, Baltimore and Minnesota to a certain extent, they have that formula down pat.
Well, we had it the last few years, and then it kind of disappeared.
Yeah.
We had 4 1-win relievers that became none. Injuries and.
Yeah, and but Andrew, a lot of those guys are home. Like the Minnesotas and the that's a good template to use. Minnesota's back end of their bullpen. A lot of homegrown guys and a lot of that's a lot of that'll fall on your shoulders. That's a lot of Latin scouting coming with those guys that throw absolute peas out of there, and it's tough. I think that the organization went real hard after Ohtani, and can you imagine what 50 bombs and 50 stolen bases would look like in the middle of a lineup? But the reality is there wasn't, and I give Chris Bassett all the props in the world for being a stand-up guy. That's probably a guy that profiles exactly how I would have been, except that I threw 25 miles an hour less and were a lot crappier than Chris Bassett. But I think in terms of being a man, he stood up and said, look, there could have been a better plan B after Ohtani was not signed. And I'm sure that there may not have been the players available. Like, this is the thing. But I don't think you guys will ever make, you learn from these. You take a swing and a miss, go down swinging, baby. I like it. So I'm bullish on the future. I think Vladdy having a freaking amazing year is just going to light the way. And if a couple guys get healthy and back to norm, I think you guys will be bouncing around it, because I think you guys have learned and you've adjusted in the back half of the year. It's been way
no
better
doubt.
than
We
the
got
first
work to
half,
do.
for
There's
sure.
no doubt. But there's the makings of a core, and we gotta have a busy off season.
You got a World Series to win, and I won't take it personally that you weren't scouting the guys who pitched in the 50-plus game. I was going to say Scott Hughes was probably, at 50 years old, whacking it up there close to 80.
He was always good.
And,
he was always good.
He had a 10. Andrew, if you can believe this, and I'll end on this, but it'll just tell you how crazy the world is. So after 95, Ted and I, that immediately in December, left to go to Toronto to run SEBA. Okay. And we did some good things with that. We put we put those games in the Sky Dome at the time, working with Mark Lino and the Jays. But one of the things we wanted to get absolutely across the finish line was eligibility requirements that were uniform for all the schools in Canada. So it was going to be a hard 4-year cap on eligibility with a 5th year if you went to grad school, similar to what they were using at the time. And it wasn't U Sport, it was CIAU at the time. And we had the colleges sign off on it. They were ready to do it. They only had
2 years,
for 2 years anyway. But then Laval and the East Coast, waffled, and they shot it down. So a guy like Hughes, because there was a glitch between when there was SEBA and OUA, when it became OUA baseball, they reinstated a fresh 4-year plus a 5th year eligibility. So he had already played 5 years at Mac. He ended up playing 10 years in total.
I believe it. You got your Scott Hugheses and your Joe Callahans and your Patrice Plants at Laval, 30-year-old doctors pitching against us. I hear you.
Yeah. Well, your only point of revenge will be maybe next year if we do another game. You can warm up your arm, not like I did, and you can plunk Hughes. That'll be your. That'll be your.
Hey, last time I faced him, and I'm sure he remembers. Maybe he doesn't want to, but was at Community, and I'm pretty sure I put one over the lights in right center off of him. So he may be wanting to plunk me.
You know what? I will say this. It was all done in good fun, and Brock got the memo clearly about maybe being in better shape, because the Mac guys are clearly a lot of doctors, and a lot of guys who jog every day. But it's all in good fun, because at the end of the day, the two things that we focus on are that there's a recent memorial scholarship at McMaster that needs filling, and at Brock we want to establish that Todd and I scholarship, so that each year a person of outstanding attitude can get a little bit of economic support to be on the baseball team. And those two things are just really good starting points, because Todd was there this weekend and is the same guy that he was 30 years ago, except for the fact he's got a gray goatee now instead of a black one. So, Andrew, I really appreciate it.
Good catching
really
up
great
again.
To get your back
2.0 second version here. Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah, look, we're long overdue a beer, since we're in the same area code most days. So we'll do that once your off season begins.
Sounds good, Mike.
All right,
all right,
Mike.
man.
For this.